Hello, everyone. I am Adrian Badu, the Deputy Director and COO of TCG, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this webinar about the Payroll Protection Program for freelance theater makers. I'm going to share a visual description with you now. I am of Indian descent. I have short black hair with a heavy dusting of gray, and I'm wearing a long sleeve pattern shirt. In this webinar, we're focused on how theater makers who are self-employed, who work freelance, who work as 1099 contractors can access federal relief from the Payroll Protection Program. This technical assistance session will be led by Andrea Nellis, TCG's interim CFO, and Lucy Mallett of Arts FMS. This webinar will be recorded and shared with you after we're done. Before we get started, we'll take a moment to offer our respects to the many lands on which we gather and to honor the traditional stewards of these lands. If you have a land acknowledgement as part of your personal or organizational practice, we invite you to share them in the comments now. While you do, I'll read the land acknowledgement posted in TCG's office. Theater Communications Group's offices are located on the Lenape Island of Mannahatta in Lenapehoking. We honor the generations of stewardship the Lenape peoples have given to the water, air, and land. As guests, we pay respect to the Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, here in their homeland throughout the Lenape diaspora. As you add your own land acknowledgements to the chat, I also want to acknowledge the unique moment in which we're meeting. It is the beginning of March, and that means it's been almost a year since so many of our theaters shut down. According to the National Endowment for the Arts, during the quarter ended in September, when the overall unemployment rate averaged 8.5%, 52% of actors, 55% of dancers, and 27% of musicians were out of work. We know how hard it's been for all theater people, but especially those working freelance, and especially theater makers who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That's why TCG has fought hard to make sure that freelance theater makers and other gig economy workers with mixed income sources receive full support from the Federal Relief Fund. It's now my great pleasure to turn things over to Andrea and Lucy to lead us through the webinar and technical session. We're so lucky to have them with us today. Andrea and Lucy, you're up.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Lucy and I are going to give you an overview of the PPP program as it applies to freelancers. And we'll hopefully answer most of your questions. We will, if you would like, you can please put questions in the chat box. Lucy will be monitoring the chat box as we go, and she'll interject if we're in the appropriate section, and we'll save some more for the end, but we should have a decent amount of time to answer some questions. Just a little bit about Lucy and myself. We both work with performing arts groups doing their finances, and we work with individual artists also. So we have spent the last year applying for and learning quite a bit about PPP funds. It's actually could be a decent amount of our time in the last year. But so we're going to just go through. We're going to start with talking about what the PPP is, who qualifies, how you calculate the revenue reduction, how you calculate your loan amount. You do the next slide. How you can treat forgiveness so you don't have to worry about it. How unemployment intersects. What happens if your business operates at a loss, and some best ways to apply. And again, feel free to put questions in the chat. But we'll have more time at the end. Next slide. Next slide, sorry. So, the Paycheck Protection Program is a forgivable loan that is designed to help workforce, to help businesses keep their workforce employed during COVID. But what happens if you're self-employed and receive 1099 income? The SBA is defining you as a business and just thinks of you as a business with one employee. So there are two different PPP loans that we'll talk about. The first draw, which was the one that opened last April, and the second draw that just opened now, but they are both open now. And currently the application deadline is March 31st. Next slide. Next slide. So who qualifies? So the first draw PPP, everybody qualifies as long as you were operational on February 15, 2020. You're still open now when you apply. You have no more than 500 employees. And you do not, and if the current economic uncertainty has made PPP loan necessary, but you don't need any proof. So there's no threshold to meet. There's no other, you could just apply. So if you have not applied yet for a PPP, you would apply for a first draw and your life will be a little bit simpler. So let's go to the next slide. So the second draw PPP, it has a couple more qualifications. You need to have used your first PPP loan, though you do not need to have applied for forgiveness. You just need to say that you've used it all. And that you need to still, again, be operational and you're still open. And then the key here is that you need to show a 25% or greater reduction in gross revenue. Can you go to the next slide? One more, sorry. So how do you show a 25% reduction in gross revenue? Now, just remember, it's gross, not net, so it's before expenses. So you could do it two ways. If you've done your 2020 tax return, you can compare your 2020 tax return to your 2019 tax return. Or you can compare your gross receipts in any quarter in 2020 with your gross receipts in the same quarter of 2019. So what if you're self-employed, you don't keep your accounting? How else can you do it? You could actually use, go to the next slide. You could actually use your bank statements. You could pull your bank statements for 3 months of this year. I'm gonna just guess that the majority of people will have the biggest decline in the third quarter of 2020, which would be July, August, September. So you could pull your bank statements for those 3 months this year and the 3 months, those same 3 months the prior year, circle all the income that's coming in and calculate it that way. And you just need to have the 25% drop. You can annotate it. It actually says it in the SBA website that you could annotate on the bank statements. And then when you're, couldn't even go to the next slide. When you're a loan under $150,000, which will all be if you're self-employed, you don't need to provide any of this documentation. You just need to put in the amounts. Actually, some of the banks have asked for the documentation.
Yeah, I think it's good to go ahead and prepare it even if you're under 150, because there are some banks that are requiring it, even though the SBA is not. And I think that first bullet point on there is very important. If you're supplying bank statements where you're noting revenue and comparing a quarter to a quarter, 2020 to 2019, be sure to sign and date every page of everything you submit.
We have gotten it kicked out. So that is just, all right. Next slide. So how do you calculate the loan amount? Go to the next slide. So you calculate, the loan amount is supposed to be 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. And your average monthly payroll can be calculated using 3 different periods. A 1-year period right up to the loan application, the calendar year of 2020, or the calendar year of 2019. I would assume the majority of people, the calendar year of 2019 is a better calculation. Can you go to the next slide? So what is your average monthly payroll if you file a Schedule C? It is your net income line on the Schedule C, which is, what does it say? Line 31. So, and it's up to a cap of $100,000. So if you got $100,000, you could divide that by 12, multiply it by 2.5, and you get to $20,833. The big key here, that's the wrench in it because they keep changing things, is that last week Biden announced that they are changing this rule for self-employed individuals, so people who even operated at a loss can still get a PPP. And they are changing it, or so they have said, but to line 7, which is gross revenue, which is a drastically different number. It's right. It's when you do your Schedule C, you have your income, you have your business expenses, and then you have your net income. So your full gross income should be much higher because it's before all your deductions before. So they have said that they are changing that. I have heard they're going to change it this week. They have not yet changed it.
But definitely, if you are thinking about applying and you have less than $100,000 net on your Schedule C, line 31, you should definitely wait until the new application is out to apply, which should hopefully be this week.
Yeah. And TCG, we will send out an email to all of the participants here when the rules change. But yes, if you are over the cap, if you are over that $100,000, it doesn't matter. You should just go apply now.
We have a question here that if your gross income in 2020 was larger than 2019, but you have a drop in a single quarter, that does qualify. It only needs to be one quarter.
Yes. All right. So if you haven't applied and you are lower than the 100,000, I would wait to the rule. There is a priority period right now till next Wednesday for small businesses. And so hopefully they'll announce this by Friday, and then you could submit your application this weekend while this priority period for the small businesses is open. Because after that, they will open it again to groups that would have more than 20 employees. All right, next slide. Forgiveness. Will this loan be forgiven? So on the first draw of PPP, you could, so it's easy as a self-employed, because what is your payroll as a self-employed person? It is just, this is your payroll, right? So if you got the $20,833, that is 2.5 months payroll by the government standards. So you need to do nothing to show that you've paid anybody. It is the money just needs to be seen going into your bank. And I have been told by some banks, they just want to see it being deposited. But the areas for forgiveness is that, you have to maintain employee compensation. The loans proceeds are spent on payroll, but as I said, it's just paying yourself, and then paying also the same thing as 60% has to be spent on payroll, but you're paying yourself with the whole amount. Next slide. And then second draw PPP is really almost the same for 1099. You are showing that you're spending the same amount of money because the money is your payroll purely, and it's just being deposited into your account. Next slide. But also one thing that has made it even easier is that for all the loans under $150,000, you do not need to submit any additional documentation. You just need to fill out the super simple new form, the 350-08S. It's super simple. No real documentation is needed, and you're just saying that you spent the money. I don't actually even know if any of the forgivenesses are open right now. I feel like the SBA has paused accepting forgiveness. So you don't have to worry about that right now for the first draw. The next slide. So unemployment. I'm going to let you talk about this, Lucy, because this one.
Okay, just that. So the PPP is supposed to be covering your wages during an 8 to 24 week period. And so as a self-employed individual, you're just getting the net, the gross amount of your loan into your account, but it's still supposed to cover a period of time. So for most people, it probably makes sense to have that, think of that as covering an 8-week period of time. So while you have PPP over your 8-week period covering your compensation, you should not also be getting unemployment, in that PPP is income. So you want to keep your unemployment claim active. So you will certify every week, but you will certify that you got income from the PPP loan for that time period.
Great. All right, next slide. So we sort of covered, we want to go to the next slide. We sort of covered this. I was saying, so in other presentations we've done, we had gotten a bunch of questions about operating at a loss. So I believe that we see the new guidelines, if you operated at a loss, you'll still be able to get an amount. So I would pause and wait. Next slide. Application, one more. So depending on your bank, you could go, most banks have PPPs open right now. Depending on your bank, I might suggest going to one of these online lenders. If you bank with Chase and you have never talked to a person, I might suggest that you just go to one of these online lenders. Same thing like a Bank of America or a TD. If you bank at a smaller bank that you can talk to somebody, I would probably go to your bank. I personally switched my actual accounts to Dime because I couldn't handle Citibank. But I have heard of lots of people having a lot of success with all three of these online lenders, Cabbage, PayPal, QuickBooks. You can click on these links. And I don't know if in more recent days, I do think the PPPs have slowed down from the first draw. The first draw, people were getting money in like 2 days. And I have seen less of that this time. But you should be able to do it on these systems, and it works pretty well. And because for the most part, as a freelancer, your PPP application is super simple, right? You're just including your Schedule C, you're just calculating off of that, and that's it. So you don't need to have backup for all sorts of other expenses. So it shouldn't be a problem.
Andrea, we have a question here just about getting if you haven't applied for the first round and then getting the second round. And so if you haven't applied for the first round, that is what you will apply for now. And you need to use all of those funds before you can apply for the second round. And it's a little confusing on an independent contractor because you're just getting that money in your account, but the minimum amount of time the PPP covers is 8 weeks. So unless the PPP is extended, which it's possible it would be, you would just get a round one at this point if you're applying.
Right. And I would still apply right now for the round one, because if you get in the next couple of days, 8 weeks would take you the middle of May. If PPP is extended, you could then apply for a second round. And everything has changed so much on the PPP that I would just never, I don't think it's ever done. So,
yeah.
I mean, there was that big rush on first round PPP funds in the spring, but yet there's still money in that bucket. So I would apply right away, and then maybe hopefully it'll extend and you could do a second round. All right. I think we got to the end of this, but maybe we could just start going through questions. Somebody asked about the quarters. So the quarters are 3 months. It's January to March, April through June, July through September, and then October through December. So they are those, it's not any 3 months, it's those set 3 month periods. You want to feed me some questions there, Lucy?
I think we've gotten to most of them. Someone asked about where they can look at the draft form, and yes, you can get all the forms on the SBA website, though each bank has built out their own version and DocuSign or their own portal for you to complete for both the application and the forgiveness. We do have a question about EIDL here and moving forward with the PPP. So the EIDL and PPP are completely separate. The EIDL last year, if you applied, you likely got an advance amount of $1,000 to $10,000, which is considered a grant. And now with the December legislation, does not impact your PPP forgiveness. So that is a grant separate than your PPP, also not taxable.
And that was that first initial, if you got an EIDL, it's that first amount that was deposited with nothing in your account.
Without signing paperwork, you just filled out the application and it showed up in your account.
That's somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000.
So that is separate than PPP. Then there is the option for you to get the loan portion, which just is a straight loan. The EIDL is open again for loans for small businesses, but the advance is not open except in rare circumstances. You need to be in a low income community and show some more significant revenue losses. And so generally, just if you're looking for a loan, that is an option now for small businesses, including independent contractors.
Lucy, I apologize. This is Jamil. I asked that question. So just to make sure that I understand you correctly, the EIDL was a separate program. Having applied and received that advance of $1,000, I still should go through the first round of PPP funding if I'm looking for a personal loan. And
Absolutely.
And you should assume it's not going to be a loan. You should assume it'll be forgiven.
yes, thank you. Yeah, but I don't want to do it too much because I will overspend it, but thank you very much. Yes.
I don't see, even if you were a big organization and you had to go through the paperwork for forgiveness, the forgiveness now for the first round says if you were not able to operate as normal. And so, and I've had a bunch of conversations with bankers. They have considered even not just being able to go to the office operating as normal. But so as a theater artist, you have not by government regulations been able to operate normally. So I understand that it's called a loan, but I don't think you should think of it as a loan. Like, I don't think you should worry about taking on more debt by getting the PPP. The EIDL is a different story. And as I also understand it, you have a certain amount of, because I do think I've heard some people get the EIDL and not realize it was a regular loan and not eligible for forgiveness. Aside from the advance is a grant, and that's that. But you can also, I think, pay back the EIDL now without incurring any interest. And I think there's a certain period of time, I think 18 months or something. But I'm not exactly sure. What else? Somebody asked about what Lucy answered in the chat about so the loans are not taxed. The PPP is not taxed federally. New York State is taxing it, and it is different depending on the state. Are there other questions, Lucy?
I'm getting some private questions here that I'm trying to answer. There was one question just about, so if you have W-2 income and 1099 income, that's fine, but you're only going to base your loan on your 1099, your Schedule C income. The W-2 does not get taken into account.
But you could be collecting unemployment, right? There are two kinds of unemployment: the pandemic unemployment that is on your 1099 income and the regular unemployment that's on your W-2. So I believe that you could be collecting your regular unemployment on your W-2 while you're getting PPP on your 1099. It just starts to get a little complicated.
Got a question about where to get the form 3508S, and you should get that. I mean, you can get it on the SBA website so you can see it. And I think the link is actually in this presentation.
Yes.
But your lender will have their own version of the form for you to fill out.
What about if you're in the process of applying for the pension? I don't see why that it should affect anything. I mean, what else? So I answered the question about so I do believe the pandemic unemployment is just on your 1099 wages, and the other regular unemployment is on your W-2. So I think that this should just affect your pandemic unemployment, so you're not double dipping. Part of the reasons why you can't get a PPP on your W-2 is because the organization that employed you should be getting it, and keeping you employed. I understand that it's not the same because we're freelancers that work for money institutions, and the work goes away when the show is over. But that is the principle. What else? Are there other questions from the private that we should answer verbally?
I'm working on some of them, but I don't know that there's any that are important for the group to discuss.
Have most people gotten a first round PPP?
Here's one just about a new LLC if an LLC would qualify in this round. And yes, well, no, so started in 2021. So for anyone, you would need to be in existence February 15th, 2020, and there you're going to have to provide a bank statement to show that you were in existence during that time. LLCs definitely are eligible to apply if they were in existence in February 2020, but there's a slightly different calculation for your PPP loan amount.
But I just want to say, if you had right, an LLC is taxed on your own Schedule C. So in the way, the government doesn't see the LLC that way. So if you had other income on your Schedule C, it would be fine before that. So credit unions, I have heard of people getting an Actors Federal Credit Union. They are involved. I might still do one of these online ones. I've heard people have had an easy time with Cabbage and PayPal. I might send you if you are doing it on self-employed wages of that cap of 20,833, I would probably just do it online.
We do have one private question just about whether if you're living outside of the US, but you're a US citizen. And I just pulled up the language to look specifically again. And the US has to be the principal place of residence for all employees. It's not enough that you're a citizen, that they want people living in the United States to apply.
Sure, you can ask your question on mic.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm just still trying to kind of understand how the relationship between the PPP loan and unemployment insurance kind of operates. So to just give a very clear example, the situation that I'm in, I am an adjunct professor, as well as about half of my income comes from 1099 self-employed income. And a lot of adjuncting positions have not been renewed this year due to the low enrollment rate. So a lot of advice we're getting from our union is to go on unemployment to cover the loss of revenue. And then I'm trying to kind of understand, is it possible because of that, it like makes up a small amount, right? Because I'm still employed, but I'm like barely employed, like because you're not getting the amount of classes that you were beforehand. And then kind of similarly with the 1099. So I'm trying to figure out like, is it possible to get the PPP loan as well as the unemployment? Because like that collectively together creates the scenario where, my income is sustainable, but like one versus the other is a little bit trickier to navigate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that your adjunct work is being paid on a payroll, right? And you get
That's correct. It's a W-2.
And so the unemployment, so there are really two buckets of unemployment and two types of unemployment. And you need to make sure that I would make sure that New York State has you in the correct bucket, because I've also seen them put people in the wrong buckets. But you should be getting your unemployment on your wages, on your payroll wages as an adjunct. And that's separate. So that's not considered double dipping, because it is a separate bucket. It is on a separate basis. And then you would get just on the Schedule C, you would get your PPP loan. But I would definitely confirm with unemployment that your money, I'm not good at actually, I haven't seen how it's recorded, but they do record it differently at unemployment. So I would just confirm that it's on your payroll wages from your colleges.
Great. So just to make it clear in my head, if that means that should say that if my unemployment is based off of my W-2 income, then I'm still eligible to apply for a PPP loan as well. And it's not seen as kind of like a violation, and it's not, and I would record it, but I would have to kind of navigate with them, like how that's recorded.
Well, I think that I'm trying to think that through as I say that. It almost I think you almost have to, Lucy, do you think you have to report it as income though, don't you, to unemployment?
I would think that you would need to still report it as income to unemployment. I mean, depending on the unemployment you have, the question is, did you make over 504 in a week, depending on your
Right.
PPP in an 8-week period? It might be true that you did not make over 504 in a week with the PPP. I mean, I think you're getting into a pretty complicated situation that, you know, certainly it's important to figure out. I mean, I think that the most correct thing is probably to not, well, to be reporting. I think the most correct thing is to get your unemployment application in and to be reporting your PPP as income still.
Right. Okay. But then it navigates based on how much it is. Like,
Exactly. So, I mean, with your PPP, the questions, are about how many hours you worked, which clearly with PPP, there's not hours, and then the amount that you get per week. And I think the PPP is supposed to cover 8 weeks. So you could use that amount as what to report as what you made.
Right, whatever
Got
you
it.
get from the PPP and divide.
okay. That
And
makes
then-
sense.
I mean, does the extra, the extra federal unemployment was just extended, right?
It's a part of the new package
Package
that it should go up to 400 starting in April, and that would go through August, but it's not 100% official yet.
And
But I
that's
do-
in addition, right? I know that's
It's
not
an
our
addition,
conversation,
right?
right?
Yeah.
It is an
Yeah.
addition. And so certainly getting your unemployment claim open, I don't think there's problems like there were last March and April with needing to wait, months to get your claim active. But it seems like that additional unemployment is going to be extended. And so it will be important for you to have at some point.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much.
So we have a question. So essentially you'd count the PPP money as self-employment income. Yes, in relation to unemployment. For taxation, it's not taxed on a federal level, but it is in New York. And then
Somebody asked about so I just put in a link. It says a PPP for first-time borrowers is the link I just put in. Loanbuilder.com PPP loan is PayPal's first time.
So we have a question about if you haven't filed your 2020 taxes yet, you can use a draft of your 2020 taxes, even if they're not filed. But you might also want to look at the option of using your bank statements.
It might be simple because your self-employed businesses are really kept on a cash basis. So it shouldn't be too difficult to use your bank statement.
Yeah.
I did one based on bank statements.
I think for independent contractors, it is a good option. And it's easy to look at a 3-month period. Is there a minimum amount you had to earn in the previous period to apply? No, I mean, you needed to be in existence in February. Right now, the loan would be based on your net income, but we think it's moving to gross. So even, there's people who get very small PPP loan amounts, but that's fine.
I mean, you could easily, if you produce a show through your own entity, your own self, you could end up getting all the way up to the cap if it goes to the gross, because that could be a much bigger number.
And then there's a question about multiple partners of an LLC. So when you apply for a PPP on an LLC, it's going to be based on your K1 for each partner. And that's going to be the maximum amount that can be forgiven for that partner. So you could only apply for the PPP based on the K1 amount for one partner and give that money to that partner because it will be forgiven. but it is based on each individual member's K1 amount.
And that changes to gross revenue would be on both the first and second round. It's just
Yeah.
in general on the PPP.
So go ahead, Andrea.
I was just going to say, so when you look at a bank statement, right, they have a column for debits and a column for credits. I think that you circle all of the deposits that are income and then add them up. And I might do a little spreadsheet that I would attach, because most
Yeah.
of the things that you upload a document. So I might make one PDF that has a spreadsheet that says, July, August, September, and you have, the columns with the 2 years and show the 25% reduction, and circle all of the amounts on the bank statements and annotate, circled amounts are income.
Yeah, I would definitely suggest putting together a summary and that shows the percentage, the totals for the quarters, and it does need to be quarter to quarter. So if it's Q3 2019, it's Q3 2020, and just making that math very easy for everyone to see where you got it.
Exactly. Make it as super simple as possible. Yes, just non-W2 related income, because this is really based on your self-employed, your business as a self-employed person, which would be everything that goes on your Schedule C.
So if your 2020 is better than 2019, if you have not gotten a round one, that doesn't matter. If you have gotten round one, then you need to look quarter by quarter to see if you have a decrease. And if you don't, then you're not eligible to apply. But you can have greater 2020 revenue than 2019 if one quarter does show the decrease.
All right, if no round one, then you're good. Just Any other questions? So we hope that as soon as the rules change, we'll send out an email. But if you're not at the cap and you think you could get more money, and you go look at your Schedule C, if your line 7 should be much higher than your line 31, I would wait.
So we've got a little more questions about round one versus round two. The change from net to gross should be for both round one and two. And then the difference between round one eligibility is really that you don't need to prove the 25% decrease in income. You do need to state that economic uncertainty made the loan necessary, but I think, generally every person on this call could say that.
Right, and so all you need to do is, for round one, you just need to have been in business last February 15th, and have an economic need, and that's it. And you will probably need to prove that you are in business. And a bank statement is what has been mostly asked for. So you would just show last February's bank statement, and it might also ask for a bank statement to show you're in business now, and you would show this most recent month's bank statement. The cap is, so on everything, even if you're a big organization, the PPP will only cover up to $100,000 in wages. And so the cap is 100 for self-employed would be $100,000 divided by 12 to get average monthly, and then multiplied by 2.5. So that is the 20,833. But if you had 50,000, it would be in net income, it would be half of that. But if you made $200,000, so once the rule changes to gross, it could be an easier thing to be higher than the $100,000 cap, but it doesn't matter. Anything, it's only up to the first $100,000 in wages. Anything else? Yeah, so we'll share the slides and the video. All right. This is good. I want everybody to go out and get their PPP money.
Probably next week.
Probably till next week if you, so, good.
So thank you, everyone. This is Karina with TCG. I'm gonna close us out here. A huge thanks to Andrea and Lucy. Please give them love in the chat. Y'all, this was amazing. This was so helpful. We're really, really grateful. I just have a few things to share. The first is to remind you that this was made possible through advocacy. Organized demands are realized demands. So thank you if you have been taking action with our advocacy alerts. If you haven't, please start. I've dropped the most recent link. There's a lot at stake in the upcoming legislation. So please make your voices heard with your representatives. Second, if you can consider supporting our work at TCG, we really appreciate it. We've provided this webinar at no cost because we know how hard it is right now. And so we know it's critical that theater people access this relief. But if you can give to TCG or spread the word, it really makes a difference. So I'm going to drop a link for that as well. And the last thing I have to share is that it almost seems impossible, but spring is only a few weeks away. It's been a hard year, but spring is on the way. And we're going to share this archive video with you. We're going to share additional resources with you. And we're going to send more information on upcoming opportunities for technical assistance. So until then, thank you for joining us. Thank you again to Lucy and Andrea and the TCG staff who are here, Adrian for his intro, and for holding it down backstage. We'll be in touch soon. Be well and be safe, everyone.
Thank you.